exciting panel, we have Connecting the Disconnected, Sustainable Development Goals, which is moderated by Nicola James, who is the head of publishing at Springer Nature SDG program. Welcome, Nicola, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Ria. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and welcome to the 7th and final panel at today's Science and Technology Symposium, Connecting the Disconnected in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So the SDGs have been discussed during several of the other panels today, so I think it's quite fitting that we close the symposium with a focused discussion on this topic. As head of publishing for the Springer Nature SDG programme, my job involves working with editors and publishing colleagues across Springer Nature in order to collect, connect and coordinate our publishing on topics that relate to the SDGs, helping this vital research to reach the people and organisations who are best placed to develop and apply evidence-based solutions in the real world. Facilitating connection between disciplines and sectors is really central to this. So I'm delighted to be moderating this panel today to explore the efforts, opportunities and challenges towards achieving the global goals. As we know, research communities, practitioners in policy and business are tackling the world's toughest challenges, and they need scientific and technological solutions. I'm therefore delighted to be joined for this discussion by 3 speakers who between them have extensive experience of connecting the disconnected. A little bit of feedback there. Perhaps our speakers could just mute while we complete the introduction. Thank you. So like the other panels, we'll have some discussion amongst ourselves first, and then we'll take questions from the audience towards the end. So if you have a question for the panel, please type it into the chat box. And I'd now like to introduce our first panellist. Professor Phoebe Condori, a world-renowned environmental economics professor and global leader in sustainable development. Professor Condori is widely recognised as a pioneer in innovative, human-centric, interdisciplinary systems for the sustainable interaction between nature, society and the economy. She's listed in the most cited women economists in the world, included within the Stanford University list of the top 2% of world scientists. She's an elected member of the World Academy of Art and Science, President of the European Association of Environmental and Natural Resource Economists, and she's received numerous international awards for academic excellence, including the European Research Council Synergy Grant in 2020. Since 2006, she's been professor at the Athens University of Economics and Business, where she's the founding director of the Research Laboratory on Socioeconomic and Environmental Sustainability, the Sustainable Development Unit at the Athena Informatics Research and Innovation Centre, and the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, KIC Hub of Greece. Welcome, Professor Condori. Secondly, we have Dr. Anindya Chatterjee, Regional Director Asia for the International Development Research Centre. He's provided leadership in research, research management, policy and programme development in the area of global health and development. Dr. Chatterjee formerly worked internationally with the United Nations development agencies and research agencies, government authorities and non-governmental organisations. He's been closely involved with national programmes in several countries in Asia, Africa and the Middle East. A graduate of the Kolkata Medical College and Hospital, he also holds a doctorate in psychiatry from the University College of Medicine in India and postdoctoral training in anthropology and public health at both the University of Calcutta and UCLA School of Public Health. He's the author of multiple articles, monographs and books on topics such as HIV/AIDS prevention in Asia. And finally, I'd like to introduce Professor Rajiv Varshney. Professor Varshney is an agricultural research scientist specialising in genomics and molecular breeding with over 20 years of service in developing countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. He's currently the Director of the Centre for Crop and Food Innovation, Director of the State Agricultural Biotechnology Centre, and International Chair in Agriculture and Food Security at Murdoch University. Prior to this, he served the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, or ICRISAT, for about 16 years in various science and leadership roles, including the Research Programme Director for Accelerated Crop Improvement and Director of the Centre of Excellence in Genomics and Systems Biology, as well as the Leibniz Institute of Plant Genetics and Crops Plant Research in Germany, where he spent 5 years as a postdoctoral research scientist. We were originally also going to be joined by Professor Maharaj Krishnan Pandit, but unfortunately he is not able to join us today. But I think you will all agree that we have a great panel with some very diverse experience, and we are in some sense connecting the disconnected just by being here and talking to each other today. So thank you all for joining me to talk about how we can bring people together across different divides to achieve the SDGs. I'd like to start with a question for Professor Condori. Could you perhaps kick us off by talking about the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration for sustainable development?
So thank you very much for having me here, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this very important issue. Interdisciplinarity, why is it important? Why is it important to stop working in our scientific silos and start collaborating in order to solve the problems of the world and make a step towards increased well-being and sustainable interaction between nature and the socioeconomic system? Well, the simple answer is that we are facing multiple crises, and none of these crises is really discipline focus. All of the crises that we are facing are multidisciplinary. The problems we are facing are multidisciplinary, and by definition, the solutions need to be multidisciplinary. So if we really want to use science in order to help humanity live better, in a very general way of putting this live better, then we really need to work between us, our scientific disciplines. Nowadays, I usually start my speeches with this graph. You know, at the moment we are facing the pandemic, the huge economic recession that is leading us not just to unprecedented inflation compared to what we had the last few decades, but possibly stagflation, the climate change crisis, the increased frequency and severity of extreme weather events, the biodiversity collapse, the population crisis, and of course the geopolitical crisis. And all of these crises are global crises. We know that the world is as resilient as the last person and country in it. So in order to move forward, we really need to find solutions that can address this multiple array of problems simultaneously and in a holistic and integrated and systemic way. And this is exactly what we are focusing on in the Alliance of Excellence for Research and Innovation on I4IA that I lead. And this is the spirit in which I contribute to the different journals I edit or co-edit. So we need to bring the research in the different disciplines together, and this really needs a revision of the way our education system is constructed, our universities are structured, and the way the academic life in terms of academic profession progression and the way researchers progress in their career, we really need a fundamental change. And we also need not just to restructure the research and education and innovation sector, but we also need to restructure how we connect to technological development, the technology development stakeholders, how we accelerate technology development and social innovations to the market, and how we engage the various stakeholders that are not scientists or technology developers, like the politicians, the policymakers, the NGOs, the civil society, the businesses, the financial sector. How do we engage them? How we educate, train them, and succeed to engage them in the needed transformation? And we are trying to transform. We are trying to become sustainable in terms of trying to be able to live today and in the future in a way that sustains social welfare, in a way that increases social welfare for everybody, not just the developed countries, but for the global south. At the moment, we have some policies. We have the SDGs, we have the Paris Agreement, we have the leadership example of the European Green Deal in Europe, but the way the policies are transposed and implemented is again in deep need, in serious need of interdisciplinary research in order to support their implementations. The policies are already towards the interdisciplinary mode of action, and this is exactly what we need to do as well. So research, and this is the framework that my team, composed of almost 200 researchers, is working, is to try to bring together the supply side, the biophysical modeling, the green digital technological solutions, the production side analysis, and the demand side preferences, behavioral economic stakeholder engagement into a geospatial and dynamic equilibrium, and simulate solutions using complexity science in order to retrieve sustainable pathways for the technology, for the socioeconomic and financial system, and for the policies that are there. These are the result of recent work that we did as SDSN Europe. This is the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network Hub of Europe, with more than 500 institutional members. I lead this report on the joint implementation of the SDGs and the European Green Deal. We announce every year our results in terms of how can we achieve the implementation of the SDGs in Europe within the framework of the European Green Deal. You know that the SDGs, the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets within them are really a very holistic, systemic, interdisciplinary framework that I call an investment program. This is an investment program for each country in the world that wants to transform and be able to move to a sustainable pathway. And in order to operationalize the SDGs in 2019, during the New York Climate Week, we announced the 6 transformations that are deeply interdisciplinary that need to happen in each and every country in order to achieve and operationalize the SDGs. And this referred to education, gender and inequality; second, health, well-being and demography; third, energy decarbonization and sustainable industry; fourth, sustainable use of food, land, water, seas and oceans; fifth, sustainable cities and communities; and last, the digital revolution to the use of sustainable development. And if you look at these transformations and how they are supported, for example, by the policy framework in the European Green Deal, these transformations that basically correspond to different ministries within the countries that can lead the transformation in each of these sections. If you look how we investigated with machine learning, with deep learning approaches, how the European Green Deal policies, which amount to hundreds of thousands of pages, if you go through all of them, support the SDGs. and how especially they support these 6 different transformations. And what we find is that the European Green Deal, and I'm finishing with this, the European Green Deal really supports the transformation of sustainable food, land, water, and oceans, and energy decarbonization and sustainable industry, but less so the transformations that are relevant for social cohesion. And this is important to know because no transformation is doable without social cohesion, without the engagement of the society in the workforce, in the education system, in the training, upskilling, and reskilling system. So the SDGs are really a holistic framework. The SDGs are an interdisciplinary systemic framework. And my recommendation would really be to assess any of the policies within the different continents against the SDGs and really focus the research in a way that can support the implementation of this really holistic and the interdisciplinary framework. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much for such a detailed answer. I was really struck by a couple of things that you said at the beginning, which were that crises don't respect disciplinary boundaries. And it's for that reason that we need to have interdisciplinary solutions, and also that we are all connected, whether we like it or not. We are only as resilient as the least resilient person. And this brings us on quite nicely to talk to Dr. Chatterjee. So your organisation facilitates collaboration between nations. So could you tell us more about the opportunities that this kind of work offers for the achievement of the SDGs?
Thank you, Nicola, and hello, colleagues. The crises that we are facing today are all global in nature. Let us look at the climate crisis. It's a global climate crisis. Let us look at the crisis of inequality. It's a global crisis. The pandemic that we have experienced, the pressures, inflationary and cost of living pressures on economies, the food crisis precipitated by the war in Europe. So we're dealing with global crises across the board, and therefore solutions to these crises, need to be global. And I want to highlight 3 things. First is that we have parts of the world where we do not have adequate data and research. So, even in research world, there is huge inequality, and we need to invest in high quality research and innovation in parts of the world where we have less of that kind of investment. So high quality research that will reflect scientific rigor, relevance, originality, will integrate gender and inclusion, and will be oriented towards use and uptake. So I think this is a big unfinished part of our agenda that we need to address. The second part is sharing knowledge for greater uptake and use. And it is not only important to generate high quality research innovation to have an impact on development. The knowledge must be visible, must be accessible, and of course, we recognize how sometimes policy debates are polarized and contested, and therefore this high sharing of knowledge it takes place within a context as well. And the third bit is mobilizing alliances for impact. And this is the crux of your question, Nicola. And this is enshrined in SDG 17, partnership to achieve the goals. And there, in the work that the center does, we foster scientific collaboration, research collaboration between countries in the region, the traditional South-South, but also between Asia and Africa. Some projects that are, health, for example, pandemic preparedness, they are Asia, Africa, Latin America. And we also foster collaboration between global north and the global south on some of the, pressing global challenges that I started with. So to me, these three aspects of our investing in high quality research in parts of the world where we do not have data, share knowledge for greater uptake, and this is not, when I say share knowledge, yeah, well, just train scientists to talk to the media. I'm not talking about that only. Yes, I mean, many scientists are very poor communicator outside their technical audience, but that's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about much bigger societal debate, and there a critical aspect of that is community academia interface. So what is the role of civil society in research? How do community knowledge systems interact with scientific knowledge systems? What are their respective validities? How can scientists respond to the concern of communities? When communities generate knowledge, such as, NGOs that provide services for vulnerable populations, which the existing public programs or public-private programs do not reach. What is that valid? How is that knowledge captured in the policy discourse? Much more systematic attempt to collaborate, to engage, to understand knowledge systems beyond the world of academia and scientific knowledge. So I'm talking of a much bigger agenda here. And finally, it's more and more. If you look at research data across the board, and we track that quite closely, as you would imagine, it's all flat. Huh? So the research funding is not going up in most circumstances, with some exceptions, and in many cases it's going down over the last 2 years. And certainly there is a big inequality. So alliances for collaborative research that includes philanthropies, includes private sector, includes new actors, is another agenda that we need to address. We, for example, we are a public entity. Most of our core resources come from parliamentary appropriation. But over the last few years, we developed quite solid collaboration with, several corporate philanthropies and so on. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, your point about sharing of knowledge and sharing of knowledge in a kind of bi-directional way brings us on quite nicely to a question I have for Professor Varshney, which is to ask what you can share with our audience about getting research findings translated into real-world action.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for this question. And let me thank Springer Nature and in particular Akansha for organizing this meeting. This is very timely, very topical subject. And I heard your views and also other panelist views. So I think as you introduced me earlier, I'm an agricultural scientist and I work towards contributing food and nutrition security, which is in perfect alignment with SDG 2, that's end hunger, achieve food security, and improved nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Before I share some of my perspective on the topic which you asked, Nicola, let me share some facts related to this food and nutrition security. And these are just for bringing all of us on the same page. So if we see the data between 2014 and the onset of the pandemic, the number of people going hungry and suffering from food insecurity had been gradually rising. And on top of that, COVID-19 crisis, they have pushed these rising rates even higher. Now, The war in Ukraine is further disrupting global food supply chains and creating the biggest global food crisis since World War II. Second, if you see like in 2020, then between 720 and 811 million people in the world were suffering from hunger. And these numbers is in fact 161 million more than what we had in 2019. Globally, right now, about 150 million people, or about 20% of the children under age of 5, were suffering from stunting. Same issue with the wasting and overweight. And even when we talk about the women, then since 2015, the prevalence of anemia in women of the reproductive age has been stagnant globally. All these figures, they are very alarming. They are not really good. Now, coming back to agriculture, and in my opinion, agriculture can address some of the above mentioned points. For instance, and I would like to share some of our experience, that high yielding and nutritious crop varieties can provide enough food and also nutrition for tackling hunger and malnutrition. Now, how the research findings can be translated to the real world solution? Let me put my views that, for instance, point number one is that I'm a very strong proponent of the translational research then that can cater the need of the society. Therefore, in my opinion, it will be really important to keep the society at the center stage while undertaking research. We need to plan our research in such a way that can be helpful to contribute to SDGs. Second, I believe that we need to have the demand-driven research if we would like to solve the real-world problem. I'm fine to undertake research to quench my thirst for understanding the basic biology question. However, in the context of contributing to SDGs, we need to undertake research that's required to improve agriculture, especially in developing countries in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, as my background is genetics, genomics, and plant breeding, I would like to give little bit flavor of that kind of research. And in this direction, my proposal is that we should be using the modern genomics approaches, modern research innovations, and integrate them in the crop improvement. For instance, while working earlier at ICRISAT, and what we have been doing that we decoded the genome sequences for several crops. We utilized the genome information to understand the genetics of trait and deployed genomics assisted breeding approaches that helped in developing and delivering more than a dozen high yielding, climate resilient, drought tolerant and nutritious varieties to smallholder farmers in India, Ethiopia and Kenya, and several other varieties technology they will in the pipeline. This is one component. Second, we also have seen that sometimes even technologies like improved varieties, they are available, but they don't reach to the smallholder farmers. So there is a big gap. And there are several issues, and they are related to the delivery systems in several countries, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa and to some extent in many Asian countries as well. In my view, and we discussed this thing in details in several articles, that we need to establish the rapid delivery system in the case they are missing or if they exist, then we need to strengthen or fix them. And we demonstrated this in the case of grain legumes through Tropical Legumes Initiative. This initiative was run for about 13 years with about $67 million investment from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And this initiative was run in 13 countries in Africa and 2 countries in Asia. I had a privilege to lead this project as a principal investigator for about 7 years. And what we delivered, then this happened through the dedicated efforts of 3 CGR centers, ICRISAT, IITA, and SIAT, national programs, and many private sector and NGOs in 15 countries. The project delivered about 266 improved legume varieties, produced about 500,000 ton certified seeds, about 6.1 million ton grains. And as per several economists, which were not part of the project, but outside, the project touched the lives of families of 5 million smallholder farmers. And I'm pleased to share that my former institute, ICRISAT, for this kind of impact, was awarded 2021 Africa Food Prize. So what I wanted to say, that you can really use these science innovations to tackle the real world problems. Now, these examples, as I said, they clearly demonstrate that new research innovation, upstream science can be used to develop technologies, but we need to take them with that favorable government policies, dedicated efforts of the national governments, and we need to deploy those technology and then take them to the last mile, which is one important missing link in many cases. Other thing is that when we would like to see the sustainable agriculture in the developing countries, we need to consider the capacity building, which is another key thing that national governments need to invest. One-time investment or projects, they are not going to be the sustainable solution. Finally, as some other panelists also mentioned, I think we also need to consider the long-term investment from international funding agencies, national agencies, foundations, and government, etc. So if we are able to address these points, I think that the question which you asked, Nicola, we should be able to take these research findings and to translate them into the real world solution. Thank you very much, Nicola, at this time point.
Thank you. So some of the things that you've all touched on have been about making sure that research priorities are aligned with real world priorities, ensuring that research is demand driven, and knowledge sharing amongst different communities. So as Springer Nature is the organisation that's set up the symposium today, I'm curious to get thoughts from each of you on how you think publishers can contribute within this ecosystem. What do you think we can do to aid the achievement of the goals in line with the points you've already made? So we have about 10 minutes left of the session. So if I could just get a couple of minutes from each of you on this, and I'll come to Professor Varshni first.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. This is again very good point. And in my opinion, the organization like Springer Nature, they can play a very important role. And in my opinion, they can do in different ways. One is that work with those experts or expert people, organization, and then document their research strategies, their success stories, and also failure. And based on these documentation, I think this will be really good that they become these documents, they are in the international public domain. And in this aspect, we are already working with Akanksha that we are having a series related to the food security where we are bringing the people from Africa and Asia, and then basically those practitioners that what good things they did, which were translated in the good stories, but some area that where they learned some challenges, and then this becomes that important points for the other people. And second point, in my opinion, is that Springer Nature kind of organization should be working with this big organization like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, European Union government, IFAD, many FAO, etc. And I think while working together with them, it will be really good idea that international organization and like-minded organizations, they can chalk out the strategy for the future. So basically we have a vision that what we are doing. Third point is that I think many times, and I already mentioned this thing when I point number one and point number two, many times as a scientist, we are always good to promote our success stories. We never tell that where we have been failed. In my opinion, documenting failures are also very important. So I think this should also be good that Springer Nature, they should be working on those aspects also. So, and lastly, I think I will let other panelists speak further, but I think in my opinion, this will also be good that Springer Nature, they consider this thing like for instance, their corporate social responsibility kind of thing, or so can they work with the national governments in the different countries, can help them to connect these different people. And I think these kind of symposium and meetings, they're very critical in this area. Thank you very much, Nicola, once again.
Thank you very much. And Professor Condori, your thoughts on how publishers can contribute?
Yes, I will be quick because I spoke too much before. I would say prioritize the SDGs. Prioritize them in terms of what you publish and make it explicit. Create an index, and we can help in that as UNSDSN, to measure the relevance of journals with regards to solving SDG related problems. Measure the performance of the journal, not just in terms of citations, but in terms of SDG relevance and in terms of solutions published in the journal. It could be methodological, technological, social, and so on, solutions published in the journals that are used to facilitate the implementation of the SDGs. The SDGs are the only global agenda at the moment, together with the Charter of Human Rights, of course, signed by 193 countries, are an interdisciplinary holistic framework that can be used as our blueprint across the world for changing from where we are to a pathway, moving to a pathway that will allow us a sustainable life, a sustainable continuation of the human race. So let's use the best journals in the world in order to facilitate this drive, this change, this transformation to sustainability.
Thank you very much. So Springer Nature is, I think, to the best of my knowledge, the only publisher that has a dedicated head of publishing for Sustainable Development Goals. And I think we would all welcome an additional way to evaluate journal performance beyond citation metrics.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. We have many ideas on this, and I think it will be helpful, and we can bring the UN in this to join forces.
Fantastic. Dr. Chatterjee, your thoughts on the role of publishers?
We in the center, we embrace the principle of open access quite early. We have also followed Springer Nature's open access policies and activities. I think this is a movement where we have more and more people joining. There is better consensus, but also better business models. And therefore, this is an area where we would like to see Springer Nature to remain engaged and be an important player in this global movement. If you go to our website, we have a policy for all our funded projects. It's not imposed on our grantees, but we engage with our grantees to incrementally move towards open access to research data, which is quite fundamental, we think. We provide dedicated support and funding for data management plans. We work with our grantees to develop capacity in terms of what data should not be shared, and we fund gold access as part of our funding. So I think we have sort of embraced this, and I hope we can develop more and more partnerships to see this, because this is critically important. And it takes me to the first point that I said, that there are data poor parts of the world. There, and I can visualize many places where accessing an article is very difficult still. And a student in university still struggles to access what should be accessible to everybody. And I think this is what I would like to, Nicola, A, congratulate you for what you have done, and B, also encourage you and applaud you to remain engaged and find more and more business models that would make it possible.
Thank you, and I think you can count on the fact that Springer Nature will. We certainly see that our commitment to driving the transition to open access publishing really underpins our commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals. We have a very, very short period of time left, so if I could ask each of you very, very quickly, about 30 seconds, if you had the opportunity to solve all the problems around any one of the SDGs, which one would be your pick? And I'll come to Dr. Chatterjee first on this, very quickly. Because this is obviously a very simple question.
Well, most simple ever. And I'm a medical doctor. I spent my life in public health research. So we are just coming out of COVID. So I would think investment in health and education continues to be, the big bets, still relevant.
Thank you very much, Professor Varshney.
Thank you. So I think that all these SDGs are very important, equally important, cannot be prioritized one over other. But in my case, being the agricultural scientist already working on the SDG 2, so this is fantastic. And I think SDG 17 will also be very important, that how we enhance the partnership, bring these different kind of players and contribute in this direction. That will be my take on this thing. Thank you.
Great. And finally, Professor Condori.
As an environmental economist who spent life on the interaction between society, economy, and nature, I would like to say SDG 13 and SDG 14 on seas and oceans and 15 on land. However, I'm going to say SDG 17 because without collaboration, in this really small world, we can achieve nothing. We are all dependent on each other, and the answer to all the problems can only derive through collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.